Julius Malema defends Traoré and shocks the West. Africa doesn't need America. In a fiery and unapologetic speech, Julius Malema, leader of South Africa's Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, delivers a bold message that's echoing across the globe: Africa does not need America. Malema publicly stands with Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, praising his revolutionary leadership and anti-imperialist stance. This video dives deep into Julius Malema's powerful defense of Ibrahim Traoré, his condemnation of U.S. interference in African affairs, the rise of Pan-African unity against Western dominance, why Africa's new generation of leaders are rejecting colonial influence. The growing alliance between pro-sovereignty African nations. Malema's message has sparked outrage in the West, but in Africa and the diaspora, it's being celebrated as a moment of truth and liberation. What you'll learn in this video: the historic significance of Malema's words, Traoré's growing influence across Africa, how this reflects Africa's changing global role, the response from U.S. and Western powers, the future of Africa without foreign control. You support Malema's statement? Comment below and join the growing Pan-African conversation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more truth-driven content on African politics, revolutionary leaders, and the global power shift. 1. Julius Malema's powerful defense of Ibrahim Traoré. Context: Julius Malema, leader of South Africa's Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, is a vocal Pan-Africanist advocating for African sovereignty and economic justice. In April 2025, Malema publicly endorsed Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's interim president since the 2022 coup, as a revolutionary leader resisting Western imperialism. His defense, expressed through speeches and media like The Voice of Africa, aligns Traoré with historical icons like Thomas Sankara, emphasizing anti-colonial and socialist ideals. Analysis: Malema's support highlights Traoré's policies, expelling French troops in 2023, nationalizing gold mines, and aligning with Russia and China to assert sovereignty. Malema's statement, "We are all Ibrahim Traoré," frames Traoré as a symbol of African resistance, resonating with youth frustrated by neo-colonialism. Traoré's youth, 37, and military background mirror Malema's radical persona, strengthening their ideological bond. However, Malema's controversial history, including a 2023 hate speech conviction for singing "Kill the Boer," risks undermining his credibility among moderate Africans. Traoré's junta, while popular, faces criticism for suspending democratic processes, which Malema downplays to focus on sovereignty. Actionable insights: regional solidarity events. Malema could organize EFF-led Pan-African summits in South Africa, inviting Traoré to speak, to amplify Burkina Faso's model of resource nationalization. Youth engagement campaigns. Use X and TikTok to promote Traoré's achievements, targeting 1 million African youth with hashtags like #TraoréLeads. Counter Western media. Fund African media outlets to produce documentaries on Traoré's reforms, challenging narratives of instability from outlets like the BBC. Challenges: Malema's polarizing rhetoric may alienate ECOWAS leaders, hindering regional support for Traoré. Traoré's reliance on Russian paramilitaries could invite accusations of trading one imperialism for another, complicating Malema's defense. Internal EFF defections, like Floyd Shivambu's exit in 2024, weaken Malema's political base, potentially limiting his influence. Metrics for success: host 2 Pan-African summits by 2027, with 20 African nations represented. Increase Traoré's positive media coverage in Africa by 30% by 2026. Engage 500,000 youth in pro-Traoré campaigns on X by 2026. 2. His condemnation of U.S. interference in African affairs. Context: Malema has consistently criticized U.S. foreign policy, accusing it of neo-colonialism through sanctions, military presence, and disinformation. In 2025, he condemned U.S. criticism of Traoré, particularly General Michael Langley's claim that Traoré uses Burkina Faso's gold to secure Russian support, not national benefit. Malema's February 2025 remarks against Donald Trump's comments on South Africa's land reform further underscore his anti-U.S. stance, framing foreign aid as a tool of control. Analysis: Malema's condemnation reflects a broader African resentment of U.S. double standards, such as criticizing coups while supporting authoritarian regimes elsewhere. He argues that U.S. narratives, like Langley's, undermine Traoré's sovereignty agenda, echoing Kwame Nkrumah's warnings about external manipulation. Malema's alignment with China, as seen in his defense of Chinese investments, positions him as a counterweight to U.S. influence but risks perceptions of selective anti-imperialism. His rhetoric resonates with urban youth but may strain South Africa's trade relations with the U.S., a key partner. Actionable insights: public diplomacy. Malema could lead EFF delegations to the AU, proposing resolutions against U.S. interference, citing Burkina Faso as a case study. Media literacy programs support initiatives like the Africa Media Collective to train 1,000 journalists by 2028 to counter U.S.-backed narratives. Grassroots mobilization organize anti-imperialist rallies in Johannesburg and Nairobi, aiming for 50,000 attendees by 2027 to amplify anti-U.S. sentiment, challenges South Africa's economic ties to the U.S. 10% of exports could face retaliation, impacting EFF's domestic credibility. Malema's pro-China stance may alienate Africans wary of Chinese debt traps, as seen in Zambia. Lack of concrete evidence linking U.S. actions to specific harms in Burkina Faso weakens Malema's case. Metrics for success pass 1 AU resolution condemning foreign interference by 2028. Train 500 African journalists in media literacy by 2027. Reduce U.S. favorable opinion in South Africa by 10%. Baseline 60% in 2024. Pew Research by 2030. 3. The rise of Pan-African unity against Western dominance. Context: Pan-African unity is resurging as African nations challenge Western dominance, inspired by leaders like Traoré and Malema. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, and solidarity movements, such as 2025 protests supporting Burkina Faso in Ouagadougou, reflect this trend. Malema's 2023 speech at Kenya's Pan-African Institute called for unity to reclaim economic and intellectual sovereignty, a vision Traoré embodies through anti-colonial policies. Analysis: Pan-Africanism is gaining traction through shared resistance to Western institutions like the CFA Franc and NATO. Burkina Faso's exit from ECOWAS in 2024, alongside Mali and Niger, signals a rejection of Western-aligned regional blocs. Malema's endorsement of Traoré strengthens this bloc, aligning with the AU's non-indifference doctrine. Diaspora protests in London and New York globalize the movement, but internal challenges, corruption, ethnic divisions, and differing economic priorities hinder unity. Critics argue that military juntas, like Traoré's, prioritize elite interests over genuine liberation, a point Malema must address. Actionable insights: AFCFTA implementation. Advocate for tariff reductions to boost intra-African trade to 30% of total trade by 2030, led by Burkina Faso and South Africa. Pan-African Youth Forum. Establish an annual forum by 2027, hosted by EFF, to unite 10,000 young leaders from 20 nations. Cultural revival. Fund projects to institutionalize national languages, as Traoré proposed, targeting 10 African languages in curricula by 2030. Challenges regional rivalries, like Nigeria's dominance in ECOWAS, may resist Burkina Faso's leadership. Western sanctions on junta-led nations could deter moderate AU members from joining the movement. Limited infrastructure hampers AFCFTA's impact, with only 15% of African roads paved. Metrics for success: increase intra-African trade from 15% to 25% by 2030 via AFCFTA. Launch Pan-African Youth Forum with 5,000 attendees by 2027. Incorporate 5 national languages in African school systems by 2028. 4. Why Africa's new generation of leaders are rejecting colonial influence. Context: Africa's new leaders, like Traoré, Burkina Faso, Assimi Goïta, Mali, and Abdourahmane Tiani, Niger, are rejecting colonial influence, inspired by historical figures like Sankara and Nkrumah. Traoré's expulsion of French troops and nationalization of mines exemplify this shift, resonating with a youth demographic, 65% under 30, demanding sovereignty. Malema's support amplifies their visibility, framing them as anti-colonial vanguards. Analysis: these leaders reject colonial legacies like the CFA Franc, seen as a French-imposed economic straitjacket, and Western military presence, viewed as perpetuating dependency. Traoré's 2023 speech, "Culture is central to our sovereignty," underscores a cultural renaissance, reviving indigenous values. However, their reliance on Russia and China raises concerns about new dependencies, and human rights abuses, like Mali's 2022 Mora massacre, tarnish their image. Malema's defense of these leaders as hope for black people ignores governance flaws, risking oversimplification. The youth-driven movement is fueled by social media, with #AfricaRising trending on X in 2025. Actionable insights: leadership training. Establish academies by 2028 to train 5,000 young leaders in anti-colonial governance, modeled on Sankara's ideals. Cultural institutions. Fund 10 African cultural centers by 2030 to promote indigenous languages and histories, led by Burkina Faso. Social media campaigns. launch #SovereignAfrica on X, aiming for 1 million posts by 2027 to globalize the anti-colonial narrative. Challenges human rights criticisms could discredit leaders, alienating international partners. Economic reliance on resource exports, e.g., Burkina Faso's gold, limits diversification. Generational divides, with older elites favoring Western ties, may resist change. Metrics for Success train 2,500 young leaders by 2028 in anti-colonial governance. Establish 5 cultural centers by 2028, reaching 100,000 visitors annually. Achieve 500,000 #SovereignAfrica posts on X by 2027. 5. The growing alliance between pro-sovereignty African nations. Context: pro-sovereignty African nations, including Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Guinea, are forming alliances to counter Western influence, as seen in their 2024 ECOWAS exit and pivot to Russia and China. Malema's support for Traoré strengthens this bloc, advocating for a united front against neo-colonialism. The Alliance of Sahel States, AES, formed in 2023, exemplifies this trend, prioritizing regional security and economic autonomy. Analysis: the alliance is driven by shared goals, resource control, military independence, and cultural revival. Burkina Faso's Russian paramilitary support and Chinese infrastructure deals reflect a strategic realignment, endorsed by Malema as equitable relations. The AES aims to replace the CFA franc with a regional currency, a move Traoré championed in 2024. However, economic challenges, like Niger's 90% poverty rate, and security threats from Islamist insurgencies strain the alliance. Malema's vision of a broader Pan-African bloc faces hurdles from pro-Western nations like Nigeria and Kenya. Actionable insights: AES expansion. Advocate for 2 more nations, e.g., Chad, Sudan, to join AES by 2028, led by Burkina Faso. Regional currency pilot. Launch a Sahel currency in Burkina Faso and Mali by 2029, backed by gold reserves. Joint security force. Establish an AES counterterrorism unit by 2028, trained by Russia, with 10,000 troops. Challenges: Western sanctions could cripple AES. Economies, as seen with Mali's 2022 ECOWAS sanctions. Chinese debt risks, with Burkina Faso owing $5 billion, may undermine sovereignty claims. Internal instability, like Burkina Faso's 2025 coup attempt, threatens alliance cohesion. Metrics for Success: expand AES to 5 nations by 2028, pilot Sahel currency in 2 nations by 2029, with 10% adoption. Deploy 5,000 AES troops by 2028, reducing insurgent attacks by 20%. Conclusion: this plan outlines a roadmap for advancing Pan-African sovereignty through Malema's defense of Traoré, anti-US advocacy, unity efforts, anti-colonial leadership, and pro-sovereignty alliances. By addressing challenges like internal divisions and economic dependency, and leveraging youth and media, Africa can build a resilient, self-determined future by 2030. Regular AU coordination and grassroots engagement will ensure sustainable progress.